Hey, shalom everyone, Rabbi Gary here, and I want to invite you to our Passover dinner. It's on April the 19th, it's a Friday night, and we'd love for you to come. All you have to do is to go to PassoverLA.com to sign up, and you'll be able to register and be a part of our Passover celebration. So we're looking forward to seeing you come.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, so the next thing that needs to happen on our Purim celebration is we need to get the groggers out, okay? So can I have the ushers distribute the groggers? Groggers. If you don't have a grogger, put your hand up, okay? Because this is a very important part. All right. So while you're doing that, I need you should be opening your Bibles to the Book of Esther, okay? And if you're not quite sure where that is, it's right before the Book of Job and after the Book of Nehemiah. All right? And we've got some, my truly lovely assistant is passing out groggers. That would be my wife, Edie. All right, so everyone needs to have a voice and a grogger, and hopefully a copy of the scriptures open in front of you, okay? And we're going to remember this wonderful story of God's protection for His people. Just as a little bit of a background, this part of the Bible comes from the time when the Jewish dispersion, having been exiled to Babylon, was then further absorbed into the kingdom that actually superseded Babylon, and that was the Medo-Persian Empire. And when we're talking about King Ahasuerus, okay, that's actually the Hebrew name for Xerxes, okay, who was the reigning monarch of an empire that stretched from India to North Africa in the Nile, which was really a vast empire at the time. So we pick up our story in chapter 1, and I'm just going to give we're not going to read this, what we're about to do is called the reading of the Megillah, okay? And if you've heard the expression, the Yiddish expression, about getting the whole Megillah, that means reading the entire Book of Esther. And we're going to do probably about 60% of it here this morning, just to move us along. But I guarantee you we're going to hit the high parts, and I don't want to miss any ahs, yays, or boos. So we're getting ready to go here. So in chapter 1, we learn that Xerxes, after a 180-day celebration of his kingdom, what probably would have amounted to a world's fair at the time, held a feast for his important dignitaries. Okay, during the feasting, the king commands his bride, the queen Vashti, to present herself in front of everybody to display. She was a beautiful woman, and to display her beauty. And in her crown, now we're not told, what else she was wearing. Okay, we hope she was wearing something else, but Vashti was clearly not about this. Okay, and so it leaves one to wonder what the king was really asking her to do. Vashti says no, and her husband Ahasuerus is furious. Okay, and he gathers his wise men and counselors around him, and was, what are we to do about the queen? And his wise men, contemplated and think about it. Said, well, You know, King, if you let this slide, then every wife, every woman in the kingdom is going to basically rebel against her husband, and there will be chaos in the kingdom, and life will never be the same again. And so the king said, that sounds reasonable. Let's do something about that. And so he puts out a decree to go throughout the kingdom that each man should be master in his own house. And at that point, then the Vashti is basically, we're not told specifically, but Vashti is basically departs from the scene, and it becomes now apparent that the king is going to need a new wife. Okay, and in chapter 2 we learn about how wonderful Esther becomes the queen, and I'm going to pick up the reading, and remember your parts. Okay, as we get into this, I'm going to pick up the reading at verse 5. I'll keep you in track of where we are as we move through the scripture here, and let's do this. Now I'm going to try not to kill myself with this thing here. Walter made me do this, because he likes ambushing his dad whenever he can. So in chapter 2 of the book of Esther, starting at verse 5, in Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai. Hooray! The son of Aer, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, okay, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her. Took her as his own daughter. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women now were gathered now at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, that Esther also was taken into the king's palace, into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave her beauty preparations to, he readily gave beauty preparations to her besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace. And he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Well, the story goes on, and we pick up now in verse 15. Now, when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into the royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. Mordecai discovers a plot. When the virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles of the presence of the king. Haman, conspiracy against the Jews, beginning in chapter 3. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes now who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman. For so the king had commanded concerning him, but Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants, now who were within the king's gate, said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Now it happened, when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay homage, Haman was filled with wrath. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to the king Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work to bring it into the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Moving along, a little bit later in chapter 3 to verse 13. And the letters were sent by the couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan the citadel. So the king and Haman... See, I told you I was going to get out of control with this thing, so I'm putting it away right now. Oh, maybe not. No. Too much fun. And the decree was proclaimed in Shushan the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, and the city of Shushan was perplexed. Moving into chapter 4, Esther agrees to help the Jews. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city. he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. And dropping down to verse 4. So Esther's maids and came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this was. In verse 7, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay in the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain to her, and that he might command her to go into the king and make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. So Hathach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court of to the king who has not been called, he has but one law, put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think that you're in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. Esther's banquet. Chapter 5, starting at verse 3. And the king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom. So Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done. Then Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet, which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. Haman plot against Mordecai. Hooray. So Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Hooray. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. And he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and now he advanced him above the officials and servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited me to come in with the king to the banquet she had prepared, and tomorrow I'm again invited by her along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing so long as I see Mordecai, hooray, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai, hooray, be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman. So he had the gallows made. Chapter 6. The king honors Mordecai. Hooray! That night, the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And was found written that Mordecai, hooray, had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, what honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai, hooray, for this? And the king's servants who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. And moving on to, we'll just keep going with verse 4 here. So the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman, I guess you're supposed to do this on Haman, I guess. I just figured that out, okay. All right. Now Haman had just entered the outer court and of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai, hooray, on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's servant said to him, Haman is here, standing in the court, and the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king asked him, what shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? And then Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor, then parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So, we know for the next few verses that Haman gets the privilege of leading Mordecai, hooray, on horsetop throughout the city. Picking up the story at verse 13 of chapter 6. When Haman told his wife Zeresh all his friends and everything that had happened to him, he was his wise men, and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, hooray, yay, for whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom it shall be done. Then Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. So Ahasuerus answered and said to the Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned now from the palace garden to the place now of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I am in the house?" And the word left the king's mouth, and they covered Haman's face. Now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, now said to the king, "Look, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman made from Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman." Then the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman, and the gallows he had prepared for on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. Chapter 8. Esther saves the Jews. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king. For Esther had told how he was related to her. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite, and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. Or how can I endure to see the evil that will come upon my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai, the Jew, "Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman. And they have hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews as you please, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke." Dropping down to verse 10. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it now with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding on royal horses, bred from swift steeds. By these letters the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both the little children and the women, and to plunder their possessions. And dropping down to verse 17. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews because of the fear of the Jews fell upon them. In chapter 9. Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the time came for the king's command and his decree to be executed. On the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could withstand them because fear of them fell upon all people. And moving down to verse 16, Verse 15, and the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together again on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men of Shushan, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives and had rest from their enemies and killed 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. This was the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th of the month they rested and made a day of feasting and gladness. Verse 20, and Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews, near and far, who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to establish among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar. And dropping down to verse 28, so they called these days Purim, after the name Pur, which means lot. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had happened to them. Chapter 10, Mordecai's advancement. And King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea. Now all the acts of his power and his might, and the account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai, the Jew, was second to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews, and well received by the multitude now of his brethren, seeking the good of the people, and speaking peace to all his countrymen. The word of the Lord. Amen. So, everybody's gotten their vocal cords completely worn out at this point. So just a few words this afternoon, or it's almost this afternoon, about Purim. Stepping back to the fourth chapter, just reviewing for a minute because we went by it kind of fast. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace for any more than all the Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. I wanted to focus for just a minute on that passage, for such a time as this. We have been on a journey the last month or so through the initial chapters of the book of Jonah, and we remember that God had appointed Jonah to go and preach to Nineveh. He had a purpose for Jonah to go and take a message of repentance to the Ninevites. Similarly, in the story of Esther that we read today, and we can turn off the. We won't turn off the yays. We'll just keep them going here. If I accidentally say Esther, but I'll deal with it. At any rate, Esther was given an appointment by God to be at such a place and a time where she could do a great work to save her people. The more often I read this story, the more I am impressed with the thought about how God can impact the world through the life of one person, okay? One single person. And each and every one of us in our circle of influence, we all have circles of influence in our own lives, are called to be people of mercy, as we've talked about, compassion, and change for such a time as this. I know myself and everyone sitting in this room this morning has things that are going on right now in your life, okay, where you were appointed for this time. And I had chosen the words of the Apostle Paul this morning to sort of begin our time together, because we have all, those of us who have walked with Messiah, even for a short time, know the things that he does to impact our daily lives and our walks, okay? We can sense that, and we can feel that, and the longer you walk with the Lord, the more apparent that becomes, and I think the more frequent that becomes. We know that when circumstances arise in our life that are difficult and troubling, that there may not be happiness necessarily, but joy is something that is unique to the life of the believer in circumstances that would be crushing to those who don't have the Lord in their life. So the story of Esther, shows us that I can't imagine being in a situation, where your people, are about to be annihilated. I think back to, what it must have felt like to be a Jew living in Europe, during the time of the Second World War. I mean, you talk about hopelessness in watching, one neighborhood after another exported, to some unknown place, and you knew it wasn't good, where they were bound. But we who know Messiah have trust, and we have joy in these circumstances that otherwise would be overwhelming. So this morning, as we end our time of worship and teaching, go out knowing that, as Rabbi Shaul said in his letter to the church at Philippi, that God is going to complete that good work that he has appointed for you, okay? That he will carry you with joy, okay, through times of hardship and difficulty, and be the person who is appointed for the time in your circumstances today, this week, and in the weeks and months ahead, because every single one of us have been appointed for such a time as this. Amen. Well, it's now time, if you've come and you are ready to worship the Lord with your tithes and offerings. We have a number of ways that you can do that. Obviously, cash or check in the offering bags. You can give online at bethariel.org/give, or on your mobile device by texting GIVE to 925-718-0020. Know that your gifts that you give here make all of this possible that we do here in Valencia and up in Tarzana and in the other outreaches that we have in the community throughout the week through our Bible studies.
Hey, shalom everyone, and thank you so much for checking out this week's teaching. If you like this video, hit that subscribe button to join our online community. If we've impacted you and you'd like to partner with us to continue to reach others, you can click the giving link listed below to give now. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Shalom.